and we are the co-founders of Dipper.
Dipper is a technology platform that guides professionals of color to a better workplace, one review at a time.
Dipper is your safe space. It is the time for you to share your voice with a community that you are a part of. Visit us and join today at ourdipper.com.
Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
We have Dr. Janice back in the virtual house. How exciting. Welcome to be back. Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the virtual launch of ourdipper.com. You requested that we continue these events, so we have decided and we have added to our lineup. So join us every Tuesday until the end of June to participate in our Shut Up and Listen themed events. Each event will feature top DEI thought leaders to discuss engaging topics impacting workplace culture. This is a perfect opportunity to share more about Dipper, a tech platform for all people of color, Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous professionals of all levels, including C-suite, to rate and review their workplaces. Members have profiles and can access the inside scoop on which companies to join and stay away from. Members can also engage with other members on Dipper's newsfeed. So today we welcome back Dr. Janice to discuss her book, Pink Elephant. And let me say that again. The name of the book is Pink Elephant. Please go and grab it now. Amazon,
Right now.
Target.
Right now.
Dr. Janice, where else? Amazon, Target.
My website. If they get it through my website, drjanicegassam.com, I actually sign each copy before they go out and just write a little note inside. So yeah, I was so excited when I saw randomly that it's selling online at Target. I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool, because I'm a self-published author. So I'm trying to navigate like all of these things on my own, but it was really exciting to see that.
I'm so happy for you. Jacinta, please tell our viewers about our guest.
Of course. And of course, I am partial to all things pink.
Me too. I love it. My favorite color.
Red.
Yes, so, if it's pink and green, even better. But I would love, I'm so excited to have Dr. Janice with us here today. The doctor is an anti-racist educator, DEI consultant, writer, and workshop facilitator. She has collaborated with companies such as Google, Amazon, and Nordstrom's. She also teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in human resource management and industrial organizational psychology. She has authored two best-selling books, Dirty Diversity and The Pink Elephant. So please check them both out. And Dr. Janice will remind us again of her website, of course. And you also have a podcast called the Dirty Diversity Podcast too that we should look out for. So as we get started, I would love if you could just give us some insight into what led you into writing this book and what do you want readers to learn?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you both for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to amplify my voice and my book through your amazing platform, Shut Up and Listen. So I just wanted to thank you both for that. So I really wanted to create something that people could use that was practical in the workplace. I kept getting questions about how like if I knew of any resources that people could get, any books that I knew of where people are talking specifically about how to have conversations about race in the workplace. And this was like right during the pandemic and then post George Floyd. During the pandemic, I was like, I need to come out with a book. So I wrote Dirty Diversity, which is like a really practical guide if your company's never done anything related to diversity. And I kept getting questions of like, what are some resources specific to the workplace? And, I love the book, So You Want to Talk About Race. And I feel like there are some chapters that pertain to or could pertain to the workplace, but I didn't know of any resources off the top of my head that spoke specifically to creating an anti-racist workplace. We all know like Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. So I thought that it was important to create what I did not see in the world. So I was like, I want to create this book. And as I was like finishing it up was during the trial for Breonna Taylor, for the killing of Breonna Taylor. So it was really like bittersweet. And in the beginning of the book, I just wrote a dedication to Breonna Taylor because it just sort of reinvigorated or reminded me of why I'm doing the work that I do. It is such an unfortunate situation, but my hope is that a lot of folks who are leading efforts within their workplace will take what they've read in this book and apply it into their companies.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I know there's been so many people have been raving about your book, Pink Elephant. So many people have read your book. And so it's been super impactful for workplaces as well. And every single person needs to pick up a copy. Every single person, right? My question is, I know you talk a little bit about white saviorism. Mm-hmm. Can you describe how we may see white saviorism and characterize how it is harmful, especially in the workplace? Because I think that's a big topic that isn't often talked about.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Netta. I actually saw it here on LinkedIn. Funny, because I think it was like literally right after the book came out. This past like around winter time, I was scrolling through LinkedIn like I always do, and I saw someone posted a picture. It was a white man who posted a picture with a black man who was, I guess, he didn't have a stable home, or he was looking for work. And so he posted this long caption, and it said, "I met this amazing guy," whatever his name was, and he's like, I'm so happy that I was able to connect him with folks. So now he has a job. He's no longer homeless and all of these things. And it felt icky to sort of read it because it came off as very like, hey, everyone, look at me. Like I'm a good person. And I just kind of was like, did you ask the person permission before you took the picture? In my head is what I was thinking. And then also like, it just came off as very white saviorist, like this white man who's in a position of power and privilege uses his power and privilege, which is great. But like, then why do you have to post it on social media? It always kind of feels sort of icky to me. And I was reading through the comments and people were like, this is very like virtue signaling, like, and white saviorism, So I was like, that's a perfect example. And it definitely shows up in the workplace, I think, unintentionally a lot of times when white people who are oftentimes in positions of power and privilege are asked to mentor people of color in junior positions. And I think that what often happens is that the assumption that this person is coming in as like, what do they call it? A tabula rasa, where you're like a blank slate and you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that like we all sort of live and move in the world like that is white centric. And I think a lot of things we do is sort of like with the white gaze in mind. So as a leader, I'm teaching this person of color how to do things or mentoring them without really understanding that perhaps my viewpoint and my experiences are colored by the fact that I am a white person. And I think that like there's often an assumption that junior people of color and even senior leaders who are people of color don't know anything, and that they're not experts in whatever their domains are. So I think that white saviorism shows up a lot in that context in the workplace, where people of color, Black women specifically, are often like our contributions in the workplace can be overlooked. We're tone policed a lot. So I've experienced that a lot in just my experiences in academia. So I'm sure that there's so many stories and lots of the folks watching have different experiences of being tone policed, or you suggest something or say something in a meeting and people ignore it, or someone says the same thing and it gets validated. And what you said didn't get validated. So it shows up a lot. And I think that like it's really important for people to be aware of this idea of white saviorism. It's not just in the movies that we watch, but it can also manifest in the workplace.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know that you provided that example of that guy that, took the picture and had to talk about this, and you talk about white saviorism. People were responding to his post. Did he respond back? Because I'm always mindful of how are people responding back? Like, are they learning within that very moment? Did you see anything? Was there any response?
It didn't seem like he was responding back to the negative criticism. There were a lot of people saying, "Oh my gosh, you're so amazing, such a great person." And he's like, "Thanks," and all of these things. But I'm always mindful of like, why do you feel the need? This is not dispelling. Essentially, white saviorism is playing into these negative stereotypes that we have about people of color. People already have a lot of negative stereotypes about Black people. By posting this, you're not sort of dispelling the myth. You're feeding into this myth that Black people need to be saved or need to be helped by white people in order to sustain themselves. So it's really interesting. He wasn't responding. I saw something similar when the pandemic started, where another white man posted how unprofessional it is to take a Zoom call from your bed. And I was so offended by that, because you're speaking from a place of privilege. I have students that have their child that they're breastfeeding as they're Zooming into the class, whose kids are running around, whose family is in a small space, and you have the audacity to say it's unprofessional and people really like went in on him on his post. But I see that a lot, even here on LinkedIn. So I think it's important to like call those types of things out, which I saw a lot of people doing, because people oftentimes don't even know that they're engaging in white saviorism behavior.
Right. No, and you're spot on with that, because you never know someone's situation, right? And like you said, you have students that are breastfeeding, but some people don't even they don't have a living room, right? All they have is their bedroom. All they have is their bed, or maybe a twin-size bed. And so to use that, and that word professionalism is very problematic. And I think that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But just to I know you have.
I was curious on the saviorism. What do you find is the most effective response? And I say that also from like personal experience. I've been in senior meetings where like a project that is completely aligned with your skill set and experience is brought up, yet it is referred that you seek out advice from someone who is not the expert in the field. And I started journaling about it, because I was like, is this only happening to women and Black people? And like it was never something that my white male peers did to each other. It was just done to people who didn't look like them. And so what have you found is kind of a powerful response? And I can say what I did, but I'm curious what, you feel has worked.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And unfortunately, that happens a lot to folks. When that has happened, when I've seen that happen in the past, or I've experienced that, what I like to do is sort of remind people of why I'm in the position in the first place. And I don't like this idea of throwing your sort of credentials in people's faces, but I think it's important to remind people of like, this is, for example, maybe this is what I study. So you're telling me to go have a conversation with this person about, let's say, critical race theory, let's say. And I'll say, well, I, spent time, a number of years studying this. So you're asking me to go have a conversation with this person because they have more expertise. But I just want to sort of like, I like to remind people of certain things and say, well, and get further clarification. So I've said in the past, well, I don't know if I quite understand so-and-so's background. My understanding is that they've only been, I don't know, studying this, or they've only been in this position for a certain number of years. However, I've been in this position, in this role for X amount of years. I just want more clarity on why you feel like this is a good go-to person. So I've like asked for further clarification and clarity. And what's happened to me is people are like, oh my gosh, you're right. I didn't even realize that so-and-so just started doing this, and that it happens a lot to me, like in academia, where I talked about it in the book where I was passed over for a role because someone, I had more experience in every sort of in every bucket that they were looking to fill. I had more experience. But there was one thing which was like my background in statistics that they were like, oh, I think this person has a little bit more teaching experience. And I was like, no, and I had to remind that person of this, but it was after the fact. So what I've seen helping people to understand is like calling it out in the moment. So kind of like, well, I need more clarity on understanding why this is a, good go-to person, because my understanding is that, this person has been in the role for just under a year. However, I've been in this role and taking on these projects for 5 years, let's say. So I think that in the moment, having the conversation helps people to unpack their unconscious biases, where just by nature, we're more likely to see white men as experts of things. So even like, people have left off the doctor on my name, or when I say I'm a teacher or I'm an educator, the first assumption is like, oh, what grade do you teach? So, it's like the very subtle sorts of things that do not happen as often to white men because they're already assumed to be experts. So I think in the moment, having that conversation and asking more clarifying questions, I feel has been effective for me.
Yeah. No, oh my gosh. That is so powerful. And right now, our viewers are chiming in, and Patrick said better fit. That word is used often. Patrick also said so frustrating. That's another thing, when you have to continuously do that work, like you were talking about, because it happens so regularly, you get tired.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. At a certain point, you're just like, okay, well, let me leave and go to the next place. But you don't know how the next place is going to be and how you're going to be treated, right? And so folks are stuck. And Simone said it hurts, right, having to do that. And so a question that I always like to ask is, how do you, and this is a little bit about self-care, right? And I know you wrote a piece about this too, but how do you practice self-care to make sure you feel whole? Because these things happen on a regular basis.
That's a great question. For me, I'm very possessive, I guess is a good word, or I'm very stringent with my boundaries.
Yeah.
And when I feel overwhelmed, I really try to enforce boundaries. For me, a lot of that is like sleep. I mentioned this on LinkedIn last week, but I'm usually not up before 10 a.m. So if anyone calls me or reaches out to me, I'm usually not up, and then I take time to get up. I like do a morning sort of like meditation where I'm like centering myself. And like I'm very conscious of setting boundaries for my own self-care. And then I also don't engage and argue with trolls. I know, Netta, you this is, I feel like I don't see you arguing a lot with folks either on social media. I have a very strict rule. I don't feed the trolls. And for me, that's been fine. I know people that I know and that I'm close with engage people in a back and forth. And I just feel like that energy that I'm spending arguing with you and trying to convince you of something you're so committed to misunderstanding could be better spent sleeping or doing something that I enjoy.
Yeah. And that, it's funny because I remember you talking, we had a conversation offline a while back, and you're like, Netta, I get a lot of sleep. I don't play with my sleep. And after you told me that, I started to reevaluate myself. I'm like, wait, I'm not getting much sleep. I need to be like Janice and get some sleep.
And I know it's hard. It's harder for you as a mom.
It's important.
Yeah, it's so important. And I know that like I always hear people saying especially as a new mom, it's like, what is sleep? Right?
That's true.
That, it's like, it's really, really hard. But I think I really try to be intentional when I can about sleeping. I don't get time to nap. I wish I did. So I just have to be really intentional about like not drinking coffee too soon before I go to sleep. And like I have a device that tracks my sleep. And then like little things like making sure it's a little colder in our room so that I can sleep deeper and things like that. But I think being really intentional about setting boundaries, because as we get back into like the world reopens, I think people are a little apprehensive. I know I am, about like, now I have to do all of these things that I missed out on when the world was not, open. So it's like really being mindful and setting boundaries. And I was actually like, part of me was very relieved when the world had shut down, because I was like, now I don't feel this constant need to do all of these things, which were fun, but very exhausting. So I think like checking in with myself and being comfortable saying no, because I think I'm like a recovering people pleaser. So I need to feel comfortable saying no to things. If it's going to help my mental well-being is what I try to stick to.
Yeah. And I've seen some interesting tweets and stuff about like, it's a relief that you don't have to make an excuse not to show up.
Yeah.
Like, it's like now you can like sleep in, you can decide like, I'm not going to attend, I'm going to, but I completely agree. And that you just being intentional, like we're intentional about so much in our professional lives. It's, being really intentional on those moves that we make for ourselves and for our families as well. And so, one of the questions that we had that we wanted to kind of take and shift a little bit is if you could discuss the Immigration Act of 1924 and how its trickle down effect into the workplace has been impactful, or how it's impacted the workplace in any way. I think it'd be a good teaching moment for all of us that are consistent students.
That's really interesting. I would say that I don't know exactly how I could sort of link the Immigration Act to the workplace in the sense of like, well, so this is kind of related, but not too related. But what I would say is what I find is that in my experience, I feel like a lot of immigrant parents put this unrealistic pressure on their children when it comes to work. So I would say that this might not directly answer your question, but it's sort of like a side response. But I think that the wave of immigration that happened in this country in the past several decades has really like the way that we view work. And I would say, and I'm speaking as a child of immigrants, I think is unhealthy, definitely. And I think a lot of immigrants, when they come in, they adopt the like capitalist mentality and mindset, because this was not something that my parents practiced when they were in Cameroon. They weren't like working and working and working and getting no sleep and all of these things. But when they came here, I feel like a lot of folks who come here just sort of adopt the, like, I have to work and produce. And I think that there's this like unrealistic pressure on immigrant children, especially of like not disappointing our parents. And like, there's this weight that I had to sort of grapple with. There's this weight on my shoulders that I feel where I'm like, I constantly have to work. I don't have the luxury of rest because my parents made all these sacrifices to come here so that I could have a better life. So I don't know if that directly answered the question, but when I think of that question, that's what I think of. And I feel like a lot of immigrants have come here and sort of we've lost the, like, I know particularly in West Africa, we're very community oriented. And I wish that we could get back to that, where we're thinking of the well-being of the other people around us. And I think a lot of immigrants and a lot of people who've come in, especially with these bills and these the legislation that allowed immigrants to come in, I think that a lot of us have sort of given up and my mom says America's not a melting pot. She said the U.S., and I'm sorry for the background noise. She said the U.S. is not a melting pot. She said you come here and you assimilate and you give up your values and you lose track of like who you are. And, I see a lot of that in just my parents and what they had to give up. And I want us to sort of get back to being more community oriented, because I think that's what's going to sustain us. The way that we were going pre-pandemic was not sustainable. So many of us were like exhausted and sleep deprived. And I think that what I want to see is more of us coming back to those like values that are inherent to us, and us as a people, we're more like focused on the well-being of other people. So I know that was all over the place. That may not have answered the question, great. But that's what I think about when you ask me the question.
Yeah, no, Janice, I can definitely relate. Both of my parents are from Liberia, and so that added pressure that they definitely put on you because they're coming into a different country and they want to make sure that, hey, not only that they excel, but that their children excel. So it's like, and I always joke around about this, you know, as especially as an African person, you have three jobs or careers or paths you can take. We all know them: engineer, doctor, or
yeah.
At a very, very young age, my mom's like, you're gonna be a big time surgeon. I'm like, right. My dad's like, no, you're gonna be an attorney. So I totally understand you know, kind of that added pressure and that mindset. But going back to what you were saying, that collectiveness and that community is so important. And one of the biggest reasons why Jacinta and I were like, okay, there needs to be the safe space. And Dip, you know, and this is how Dipper kind of evolved. I want to kind of talk a little bit more about your book. Was there, as you were writing your book, was there anything that was triggering or striking to you where you were like, oh my gosh, I have to take a pause, you know, I have to take a pause. This hurts right now, but I have to write through it. Was there a moment as you were writing that, especially as it pertains to the workplace, right? Because we're all in the workplace.
There were, I struggled with, should I share certain experiences? Because I was like, you know, I just didn't want the folks that were involved in the experiences to know, you know, I wanted to keep sort of like, I didn't want people to know that I was referring to certain experiences. So it was tough. There was an experience I had where there's so many, but there's one where I was clearly passed over for a job for someone who was completely unqualified, but who was white. And I felt like that was like what they wanted. And that was, I grappled with including that story in there. And I was like, oh, I don't want to get too personal, but I feel like stories are what help us connect to each other. So I felt like it was important to include that situation and that story in the book. But I think I really struggled with how much I should be revealing and how much I should be sharing, because it is painful to sort of regurgitate past traumas and past situations with racism. I forget that certain things happen. And then when I'm asked to sort of like, or I'm trying to remember them, I'm like, wow, like I completely forgot. For me, it's unhealthy, but I buried a lot of things like deep down. So when I was on, I did a podcast interview yesterday and she asked me what, you know, made me want to get into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think one of the things was we lived in Minnesota and there were no Black people where we lived. We lived an hour outside of Minneapolis. And my parents had to go into foreclosure because our house wasn't selling because people didn't want to live in a house where Black people had lived. So like those, I forgot about that. And when I started to think, I was like, wow, a lot of things I buried like deep inside me to survive, to, you know, I can't like focus on certain things because it's not going to be productive to me moving forward. So I think that like just reflecting on my past experiences with racism in and out of the workplace was sort of painful. But I think the word is cathartic. Also, as I was writing it, where I was like, oh, it feels nice to like share this because I know I'm not the only one that has experiences. And I know that there are other people who have gone through the same experience.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
And that's what it's interesting because sharing can be very scary, right? Because you don't want to out other people. You don't want to out your experiences. I know I've seen a lot of things where even people talking about childhood trauma, it's difficult because they're like, look, I love my parents. They're great. But I went through some stuff that was really difficult. And so in the workplace too, that can be very trying, but it can also be healing for the people who may have been the ones who push the trauma on you, that they see that they can, it's information that has been revealed to them that they didn't know of otherwise. Have there been, you talked a little bit about like confronting when someone is downplaying your experiences and speaking to that. Is there anything that you feel where a conversation you had to have with someone before the book came out where you were like, look, I talked about this thing And it's in the book. I always think to the best man when they had like that chat, like, look, y'all in the book. You know, so like, were there any conversations like that you had to have where you were like, this is in there, you know?
No. Well, so the folks that I tried to speak very vaguely and in more general terms so that the folks that have sort of harmed me in whatever ways in the workplace and outside of the workplace don't know who I'm talking about. So I tried to like not use names. For my first book, I did because one of my close friends, we're still really close now. We had a situation when I first moved to New York. We were roommates, and he used the term nappy. And he was referring to Beyonce. I think we were talking about Beyonce, and he was referring to her hair. And he's not Black, but he's a person of color. He's Mexican. And we had a conversation where I had to basically say, don't use the term nappy. It's a racialized term that's derogatory and offensive. And it was a learning moment where he was like, oh, I didn't think about that. I just hear the term and I never thought about how it's a very derogatory and racialized term. And I think I referenced it maybe in this very briefly, or maybe I didn't. But for that first book, I had a conversation with him where I said, hey, I kind of like, mentioned this in the book, and he was totally fine with it, but not in this one. Because I think that the folks that I was referring to, and I also felt like these are my experiences, so I shouldn't have to share with anyone like, hey, is it okay if I include this? Because it was my experiences and treatment I experienced. And I was vague enough to where even if folks that were involved think it was about them, it's very like, it's hard to tell. It's kind of like that song, I bet you think the song is about you. And it was vague enough to where I kept their anonymity and privacy, and I didn't name names or name companies or anything. But I didn't have, for this book, I didn't really have that conversation with anyone.
Yeah.
No, thank you for that.
Yeah, I was going to just say, I saw Turquoise's comment. It's a little like if you scroll up. And I think that's a really good point. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yes.
Because that is very true, where there's this perception that, of course, when I start talking, there's all these things in the background. There's a perception that immigrants are harder working, particularly Black immigrants. Yep. And what I've seen is there's a lot of sort of propping Black immigrants up over our Black American siblings, to where there's this perception, even within my culture, where a lot of Black Americans are labeled as lazy. And it's like, oh, you don't date them, don't associate with them, because these aren't the people. So that's a whole nother conversation where I do agree with you that this was not true for my parents. They came here with no degrees. But there are a lot of immigrants that come here, particularly Black immigrants, that already have higher degrees in the countries that they came from. So I think that that's also something that's deep, the trauma that you experienced, because my dad came here and sort of thought he would be embraced by his Black American siblings. And I think that there's this division that was felt on both sides, where they felt like, who is this person coming in? We don't relate to this person. And my dad kind of felt like, why aren't these people embracing me? So I think that's definitely an important point to touch on. And I don't even think that a lot of white people or non-Black people realize and understand this sort of contentious relationship between Black Americans and Black immigrants and first generationers. But that's a whole nother conversation I'm open to having.
Yes, we can definitely dive into that. Yeah.
It's interesting because that's something, again, that's not often talked about. And I'm happy that Turquoise definitely mentioned that, because there's a lot of trauma involved in it, right? Like, as Black people, we're a community, we're a family, but we also have some division and some hurt and some pain that also has to be talked about. And so I'm happy that we can do that at some point. Kareem said racism is stressful. And hold on, expensive. People don't think about that aspect.
It costs coin for sure.
It costs, right? And so working to prove ourselves, spending to feel value, and then working against the machine.
Kareem, you are speaking back.
Yeah.
Working with spending to feel. I just saw a post about how like this idea of luxury, which I love. I've been seeing a lot on Instagram of Black women embracing luxury. It's sort of like a regurgitation of like these anti-Black or white capitalist systems. That's a whole nother conversation. But I think like sometimes I feel this push to like, oh, I need to go out and get, and I'm not like, I've never been the type of person, I don't really care about like bags and things like that. But I love seeing people being able to afford those types of things, you know, and I'm just like, those types of things never really excited me, but I love seeing my friends and, you know, people I'm close with getting expensive shoes, getting expensive bags, getting expensive cars, embracing luxury. But I also kind of think about like where that desire came from. And a lot of times it's like spending to feel value and to prove that we're worthy and that we beat the system. And so I think that that's such a valid point that you made, Kareem.
Oh my gosh, that's a whole nother powerful discussion and conversation because oh my gosh, there's just so much embedded in that. Goodness, we definitely touched on some important points. Is there anything else that you want for our viewers to learn a little bit more about your book, for them to go right out and get it and let all of their employees know that they need a copy as well?
Yeah, there's a chapter in the book toward the end where I talk about like specifically how to support Black employees, because I think that like when we can't have a conversation about anti-racism or racial equity in the workplace without focusing specifically on Black employees. And what I will say with some of my clients is that people are sort of tired of talking about Black Lives Matter and Black people specifically. And there's this like fatigue. But I think that like it's important to focus on anti-Black racism in particular, because it's a very like unique form of racism and all of our oppressions are interconnected. And if, you know, the people at the, you know, as Isabel Wilkerson called it, like a caste system, a racial caste system, if the people at the bottom of the racial caste system are free, then everyone else will become free. So I think that it is important to focus specifically on Black employees, because anything you do in the workplace that will specifically benefit Black employees will benefit everyone else as well. So there is a chapter where I focus specifically on that. And I think that any American workplace and any workplace globally, because anti-Blackness is global, any workplace that really wants to become anti-racist has to ask themselves, how do the Black employees feel? What are we doing to support them? And what could we be doing to help them to advance within this organization? And I think much of the conversation is still centering on how do we educate white people on racism, but educating white people on racism isn't necessarily bettering the experiences of Black people. So I think that we have to sort of shift the focus. And I hope that this book can be a catalyst to people doing that.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure. It's such a pleasure to have you back on. And you know, we're going to have to bring you back on again. And
Thank you so much. And I just want to correct myself. This is not a shut up and listen, right?
No, this is.
It is. We extended it.
I thought I misspoke because I know that there's a little bit of a different title. I was like, I didn't misspeak in the beginning. But thank you both so much. I really appreciate you sharing your platform with me and with other folks who are in this space. I've been seeing all of your other lives. So I just want to thank you again. I really appreciate it. And I think that when we talk about how we get back to that community mindset, I think that helping and uplifting each other and amplifying each other's voices is one of the ways that we do that. So I just want to say thank you to you both. And thank you for all the great comments. I've been like reading them.
No, they're so great.
I know, they're amazing. They're amazing.
I really appreciated your comment. I don't think your comment was divisive. I think Jason was the one who said maybe he felt it was divisive. I loved it. But I just want to thank you, Netta and Jacinta. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you
and
so
can
much.
I remind the people your website is Dr. Dr. Janice Janice Gassam GASSAM.com.
And I just
purchase the book. You did awesome. Purchase the book on her website. She'll write you a note. That is amazing.
Come on, you need an autograph.
You need an autograph. Yeah. Go ahead, Netta. Thank you so much.
To all professionals of color, connect with us on ourdipper.com right now by signing up and completing your profile on ourdipper.com so that we can unpack all the gems our guests dropped today. Also, most importantly, be sure to review and rate all companies that you have worked for on ourdipper.com. Let your mom know to review and rate.
Cousins.
Grandparents know, right? Anyone that you know, let them review and rate all companies that they have worked for on ourdipper.com. Sign up, be the guide to a better workplace, log in to share your voice and find your space. And thank you for joining. We hope to see you on Dipper, on ourdipper.com today. Bye.
Bye.